Front Garden City proposes a new approach in supporting legislative policy that will enable people to repurpose front garden thresholds as places to meet, to share and connect with their neighbours, to strengthen social bonds, address issues of loneliness and improve on well-being. Our proposal works with existing elements brought together synergetically, and this synergy is apt for the way in which we have worked together to put this proposal forward, a collaboration between Matter Architecture and Studio Berman Design Office. The proposal empowers people at a super local level within a strategic framework and a sequence of steps to spread the front garden city throughout a town or a city, creating a connected network of activated front gardens, steps and frontages. In presenting to you today, our hope is to work with a stakeholder or consortium of developers, house builders and local authorities to create the first front garden city in the UK. This slide here shows an example of the idea being brought together, a series of components that as a whole brings into play permissions and local neighbourhood cooperation and represents an opportunity to bring together local governing bodies with residents to improve on streetscapes, build relationships and enable residents to better connect with one another. We're going to talk you through the idea of these key steps that, together and initiated over a period of a few years, would build up a connected network of shared, well-used and enjoyable community-managed public spaces. The first informal step would invite people to a series of micro-gatherings held between neighbours. Gatherings would be limited to a small number of people, but spread along a street would offer a strong sense of communality. As a first step, this takes the street party as a point of inspiration and to the moments of exchange that occurred over fences and on front steps during the clap for carers. This first step here is the invitation, a moment of inviting a neighbour to share a cup of tea, a biscuit, to meet up and to say hello. An organisation would need to provide the impetus and the authority or the umbrella for this. It could be a local authority or other type of organisation, and it would take the form of a digital postcard that people could email to one another or print out at home and post next door. These initial meetups would establish the appetite for these events and begin to find different ways of using these spaces. So the first step is about connecting people under the umbrella of semi-officiality to ensure it's done equitably and in an unthreatening fashion. Boundary disputes are a common cause of neighbourly issues, so the process needs to take small steps at first. After these first small gatherings, neighbours would be encouraged to set up a regular mutual meetup, to suggest outline ideas for ongoing meets, and to set out a simple set of needs. The authority facilitating organisation would provide a template for this to prompt discussion and broker agreements. Neighbours would be encouraged to make their own front garden agreements and have agency over these ideas, but suggested ideas for what a garden agreement might contain could include regularity of meetups and at what time, ideas for items that could be brought along to help facilitate a micro meetup. And these T&Cs would be short, playful and creative in intent, setting out not just a set of ideas for when and how meetups could happen at 10 a.m. on a Friday morning, not at 3 a.m, as well as notes about favourite biscuits, bourbons, needs, a deck chair for Harry, a space for a mobility scooter for Bill, but also an indication of future changes that could be made to the front garden area to better facilitate threshold meetings down the line. There are existing mechanisms for temporarily holding a street party, so this provides a good basis for discussing how communal events could extend to the use of front gardens and steps. The front garden city would require resident, local neighbourhood and local authority cooperation. COVID-19 has seen us all substantially reappraise public space and also reappraise the role of the state in supporting residents at a local and a national level. The next steps would see local councils supporting residents to improve their streetscapes, to improve front gardens in becoming usable, useful spaces. A common barrier that gets in the way of many people making good use of frontages around their flats and houses is the presence of bins and bikes that fill up front gardens. Meanwhile, recent events have drawn attention to the need for significant better access to and use of bikes. The next step in the front garden city would see bike and bin stores being added to streets so that front gardens can be freed up for more enjoyable forms of use to enable space for meetings, sitting, exchanging gossip, looking out onto the world, accessing fresh air, and for the growing of plants. At high level, providing bike stores and bin stores in the streets would be supported by a wider principle of improving access to car club points, electric charge points, and the support of bike hire rental schemes. I'm now going to hand over to Roland, who will be continuing with the next part of our presentation.
Thanks, Zoe. Overall, our approach is to use ready-made or as-found components where possible, especially in the early stages, to achieve maximum impact for minimum effort and expense. The existing bicycle hangers that are in my own street could each accommodate the bins of 4 to 6 houses, for example. This will mean reducing car parking provision, but in my own neighbourhood, people have been quick to embrace this, and there is already a waiting list for bike hanger space, while there are now empty car parking spaces. Many people do not have the means to rework their front gardens, but as we have seen with the recent swell of interest in gardening during lockdown, a huge number of people are interested in getting green fingers. Gardening is a positive activity that improves wellness and mental health. It's an accessible activity for many people and is also a chance for people to share ideas, develop seed exchanges, and share homegrown produce. Meanwhile, we have too seen many more people around the world developing an interest in at-home arts and crafts activities, some of which can be carried out outdoors. The front garden city gives a chance for people to carry out these activities in their front gardens. By the authority or umbrella organisation putting in place a garden city licence, the front gardens become a form of temporary public space. Local groups would be helped to establish as community organisations to be able to access funding such as the Mayor's Greener City Fund. Edits might include removing a portion of wall or fence to enable a shared seat to be placed between dwellings, to hang a swing on a front porch, or to create an awning between two balconies so that neighbours can chat to one another under shade or during rain. These alterations do not need new forms of design. Ready-made items would be brought into use. Kickstarter funding would be used to rework and edit spaces to make them more joyful and usable. The generic temporary licence is envisaged to last for only 12 months, providing a basis for residents to flesh out their communal agreement as they try out new things with the Kickstart funding and allow more people to join. During this time, a longer, more detailed and considered licence can be developed that protects people's property rights and puts in place good governance. This in turn enables access to more significant support and funding. It's also important that residents and owners who don't want to take part don't have to and don't feel excluded from the street. Negotiating these situations in a fair and transparent manner takes time, and the licensing system provides this cover. The make-do measures to relocate bins, bikes and cars can form the basis for permanent street changes that may go in tandem with the street self-management, such as community recycling and waste arrangements, and over the long term, possibly even community energy schemes. Initially, we envisage a small number of pilots, say 1, 2 or 3, ideally under a single umbrella organisation to share resources and learning. That same organisation during the period should develop a strategy for the expansion of the front garden city to a much wider area, providing tools, techniques and other resources, as well as the overall framework. The model for this might take inspiration from such examples as the London National Park City, which created a logo and a set of principles and resources together with a call for projects. It stayed away from a formal certification system to keep it open and accessible. This is a delicate balance, as it needs enough definition to drive change whilst remaining inclusive and accessible. Other organisations like the National Community Land Trust Network also provide good examples of enabling structures. In the end, our objective is that the idea will gain a life of its own and proliferate organically. We'd love to work with a local authority, a housing association, a charity or group of community or other organisations to make this happen. We've illustrated this proposal using a Victorian terraced residential street, but it's by no means limited to this, and we think that it might even work better in a more mixed street. Thanks for listening and looking forward to your feedback.
Brilliant. Thank you both. I've seen some really nice chat happening at the moment. If you could unshare your screen now, Roland, I'm going to invite your feedback panel without further ado. So we're going to bring back Aminah and should just join you one by one. Romy. And Pam Smith from the National Trust. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. And Natascha is going to join us as well. Brilliant. Well, I'm going to kick off with you, Romy, this time, because I know that this proposal was one that was dear to your heart when we went through the judging. So maybe you could start.
Thanks. It is, yeah. I'll put something in the chat later, which will become obvious maybe, but it's quite funny because we have a product which probably a lot of you have no awareness of called Stoop. So we loved it from the beginning for obvious reasons, but going slightly deeper than that, for the same reasons, to bring people together. It's a gathering place. I think all of the ideas in these two submissions were excellent. I mean, everything from mental health and isolation and loneliness, which is so important now, and again, both of them responding to the COVID crisis. You know, there's no coincidence in that. Obviously, it was much needed before, but I would say so much more needed now. And my son, who's moved on, sorry, I've mentioned him twice, he's moved on from studying geography. He lives in a house in Oxford, in a student house, very like the ones we've just seen in the graphics. And the whole street, well, it's blighted by students, to be quite honest, to be fair, but by bins and debris, and there are just sort of cheap gravelled bits out at the front, and, you know, everyone's trying to kind of keep the students away if they're in a normal family house by, you know, the privet hedge. And it's exactly like those images. You know, it would be so much nicer if it could just be opened up, and a more democratic use of that space and less defensive. I just think it's such a great idea. And I saw exactly this really cycling around Amsterdam a couple of years ago. It strikes me as so Dutch. There were kind of muse developments, quite new, where there were no defined front gardens at all. It was very like your images again, just opened up. People had cycle parking there. I don't actually remember seeing any bins, so I don't know what happened to those, but cycle parking, a bench outside where people would just sit and have a chat with neighbours. Such a different culture, and so lovely. Even just spending 10, 15 minutes in this street, you could just perceive that it would be a very different place to live. So I think it's absolutely doable. I think, again, we're looking to other countries maybe for some precedents. I think it is done well in places like the Netherlands. But yeah, it would be lovely to see this. I think the whole principle is great, and just sharing this space in a better way. The bin blight, we have to do something about. And I think it was one of the other submissions from a more commercial aspect of the sort of behind the high street that we saw. I don't know if you remember that, Christine, but I think there was a talk of gathering bins in one place. You know, at the end of one of these streets, you just have a repository somewhere else. And okay, it would mean we'd all have to carry things somewhere, but to not be blighted by these wheelie bins in beautiful architectural streets often, I think we have to do it. We have to do better. So yeah, both of you, I think really interesting stuff. And I'm going to post my link now.
I think, yeah, I remember, Romy, we were having a conversation. I was talking about in Venice, you had to walk to this boat that was only parked there for 30 minutes on a particular right. 2 mornings a week or something. And it was, you know, and once you knew what to do, it was fine. It wasn't very far from where we were. And these boats were obviously distributed all over the place. But yeah, if Venice can do it, then so can we. Then so can we. I'm going to pass over to you, Pam, for some thoughts from you.
Okay, remembered. Brilliant. So pardon the pun, this is really up my street as a gardener living in a city. we talked quite a lot about Garden Cities movement, and you've really identified it, seeing the garden that is already in the city. And I think the timing for this is perfect. I love the idea for the Front Garden City concept, and I shared a link about the RHS Front Gardens project. I think for all of us, I'm a dog walker, but even in lockdown, probably a lot of us will be doing more local walks. And one thing that's become apparent is all these familiar houses and gardens that we often have a nosy at as we walk past. We start to see the faces of the people who live there. So I've had lots of conversations, people, seeing people on VE Day having picnics in the front garden. So I think the timing for this is perfect. But also, I think we've got such a small window of timing now. I don't know how to put this in the best way, but I've lived in terraced houses, and each one I bought from an elderly lady. And I think we've got a few years left where we've got elderly single people living on our terrace streets, for example, next door to young families, next door to young people renting. And I think that intergenerational possibility through this project is great. And I think that really draws it in. I would also say, as a gardener, lots of people think about low maintenance gardening, which always, I don't know, disturbs me a bit. And there may be some people who have a low maintenance front garden and they see this as extra work. And I think Roland mentioned green fingers, and it's just about, you do find it's a bug, and people start off with low maintenance. So you may have some guides about easy things to grow to brighten up your communal space, but actually people will want to do more, and actually how they progress to actually get the gardening bug. So not to be taken in by everything has to be really low maintenance. And I do a lot of urban ethnobotany projects, which are about creating botanical walking guides around local streets to highlight what is great about where you live. And I think so, looking at this about adopting what the local plants are, what the street trees are already. There's lots of adopting street trees. So I really like the approach of that quite cautious, progressive approach of bringing people in gently and slowly and allowing people not to participate. And perhaps sometimes people may just want to adopt their local street tree, but not open up their garden. So there may be something for everybody. I'm quite keen for the National Trust head gardeners and garden teams that I support in the Midlands, that we look to garden beyond our garden gates. So we actually take the gardeners out of our properties into our urban environments and share the skills and the passions. And I think walking through streets with a gardener's set of eyes, we notice a lot of things. We notice amazing plants and plant stories that we can share with communities. So I think there'll be a lot of horticulturalists who love to be part of this, and hopefully some will be living on those streets as well. So yeah, I really like the idea. I really like the shared presentation, because I thought it was very much in the spirit of sharing the space as well. So thank you, that was great.
Brilliant. I think some of you may have seen on Twitter, there was a person chalking the names of all the weeds on the streets, and ones that were edible. And and this kind of idea of education and horticulture and celebrating what is there, which I think is really, really unique and creative. Natascha, I'm going to jump to you if you want to unmute yourself. And
all right, thank you. I mean, I, just like the others, I thought I didn't really even need to read past the name to think this is exactly what we need. And it's also, again, what we're trying to design in when we're looking at everything that we're...
Oh dear, we've lost her connection. I'm going to hope that she refreshes. Oh, here, she's back.
Sorry. Yes, so... yes, we're planning on doing some of these things already, which I'm really excited about. I've seen quite a few comments on the list about bin blight and car blight. The big thing that we're trying to do is think about moving cars away and making sure that they are still connected and they are still classed as infrastructure, but actually they are not the thing that dominates the environment. And I think it goes exactly the same for bins. So the idea of moving those things out and making bikes a more accessible option, I think, is terrific. If that's a step too far, I kind of thought about bringing it back and thinking about how you could then link with crossing points, because really what you want to do is make cars a less attractive option to less dominate that space and be able to connect more of those spaces to make it more meaningful. The first presentation that I saw talked quite a lot about steps, and I suppose just with my inclusive head on there, is just a concern about how many steps or ramps, and maybe when you talked about through the licensing applying for funding, actually there may be something there that means that these places are accessible for the maximum number of people, which I think is really interesting. And then taking it further, if there was a way of being able to move bins and cars and create more of a space so that it became some of the places that you actually had on your diagrams with kids playing in the road. Actually, there are some fantastic examples of where landscape architects and public realm designers have designed stuff so that, like, the paving looks like a carpet. So it's literally bringing the inside outside. So it creates that kind of feeling that a community can get on board with and they can integrate with. But I mean, I love the idea, and it just feels like it's something that should be so achievable, providing the funding's in place. So thank you so much.
Brilliant. I mean, I think one of the things I like is the big lunch really transformed our street, everybody going out and having lunch. And it was only one day a year. But already, you know, I knew way more people than I knew of all ages and of all different makeups, and people that I had no idea that I lived door to for so long. So so a really great starting point with those cups of tea. Aminah, you're I'm going to bring you in now. You're our last for our last little bit of feedback for the day.
Great, thank you. This was a great presentation. I've lived this reality in the stoops of Brooklyn, and so it was just lovely to see. And I wanted to just give a few ideas of how something that seems so simple as just kind of opening up people's front yards and gardens actually creates community. When we first moved to the neighborhood of Brooklyn near Prospect Park, this was the way that we got to know all of our neighbors. People sit out, kids have their chalk, adults have wine, people sit and chat, and just this idea that from the minute you walk out of your door, that even though the steps in the stoop are technically yours, that it's something that you're willing to share with people. And I think it's something really important. Another thing I wanted to suggest is you talked about the idea of getting bigger. Obviously, like, you want this to be something that goes beyond, you know, just Zoe and Roland, the two of you. You might check out a group called Playing Out. They're based out of Bristol. If maybe you already know them. I see you shaking your head. Okay, because they created sort of a template whereby they had success after trial and error. They got their template together, and then they just put it on their website so that anybody who was on a particular kind of block could do that sort of thing. And what's nice is then you can take just the spending time outside with each other, create a community. It can go beyond that. There's a group in Brooklyn, they're called Stoop Stories, and they've gone around even during COVID, and they interview people. And this is their stoop, this is where they live, and you learn about all kinds of families from all kinds of backgrounds and races and cultures. And this is something that's shared so that you get to know your neighbors. And then there's another group that's called Stoops Bed-Stuy, and they actually have turned it into performance art. So they do sort of a stoop tour once a year in the warmer months. And people go from stoop to stoop, and it might be watching some people play chess, it might be a dance performance or poetry or kids singing or whatever you have, but it's like the streets come to life. So by this little idea, you really wind up building community. And then I wanted to just leave you with a question, something that I've considered myself. I don't have the answer, but I want to leave it with you, which is these type of initiatives have been very successful where you have single family homes, or maybe in Brooklyn the most, you might have two people like sharing a brownstone. But I'm wondering how this can radiate out also to lower income families who may live in 2 or 3 story dwellings, but they're still on residential blocks, and obviously would benefit just like anyone else from this kind of community building. And so something to kind of keep that in your mind as you're going forward. And thanks again, and good luck.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Aminah, I love that you told me that your daughter calls it stooping or something.
Yes, we were talking yesterday. We used to call it stooping it out. And so if we were inside after dinner or on the weekend, we wanted to all go out together, we'd say, it's time to stoop it out. And so she turned it into an activity.
Love it.
Oh,
Love it.
no.
Let's dupe it out. Zoe, just briefly to wrap it up, Zoe and Roland, it would be great to hear back from you. I really like Aminah's point about, playing out had this problem. How do you make this not a middle class tea party and bring it out to those other groups that may not have a stoop or maybe in a different one. But it'd be great to hear your reaction to that.
Yeah, I mean, I said at the end that I thought that we kind of chose a typical Victorian terraced house to illustrate it, street to illustrate it. It was just for convenience. It was just trying to find the right image to illustrate the points. But actually, we were trying to find an example of a much more mixed street. And I think that we thought it would actually work better in a mixed street. I think that one of the biggest hurdles to this, all of the things about bins and bikes and cars, we solved all those problems individually elsewhere, and it's just a case of bringing those together. I think the biggest hurdle is overcoming people's attachment to their sort of psychological attachment and legal attachment to property, and the radical underpinning of this idea is to change temporarily a piece of private property into a piece of public property. So, and the quid pro quo for that is that if it's done on a sound legal basis, then it should actually be able to access public funding to support that. And I think that that's actually easier to achieve in shared housing because you don't have that same problem of these artificial divisions. So that's really kind of at the heart of it. And I think it would be great if for the sort of pilot project, we can find such a mixed street.
Zoe, do you want to add
I 100% agree. I mean, absolutely, as Roland's put it, I think part of what we sought to balance within this presentation is and encourages a thinking that errs towards ideas around, exactly as has been said by some members of the panel, this idea of a template, a gentle but encouraging piece of policy or legislation and some supportive funding that would help people be encouraged and be felt to give agency. So there's this kind of idea about, I think what we didn't want to do is we didn't want to get stuck into just the design side, because actually people, these kind of changes that we're talking about are edits, adjustments, and you don't necessarily need a kind of an architect or a designer to be doing that, but it's actually more the kind of the political impetus of encouraging people to do this. And I enjoyed, Christine, you making that comment about the lunch, because actually one of the things that we had talked about when we were chatting was actually, well, with this, maybe we could have a new bank holiday would be introduced that would be the front garden bank holiday. So you have all these, and this is why we really wanted to present this as this set of steps, and that image at the end, which is about those sort of dots. It's dots of how something spreads out through a city, but it's also a dots of the spreading of multiple ideas. So it's a kind of idea around a sort of like an urban.
You had a bit of a dramatic cut there, but you did finish.
I dropped out. But yeah, I finished. Okay. I finished my sentence.
You did finish your sentence. Well, we've run a little bit. We've run a little bit over time, but hopefully you guys really enjoyed all these radical ideas. Can we please give a big applause to everyone? I mean, I think you can applaud with your emojis. But also, thank you so much to our panel. Thank you so much to Vestre for supporting. Thank you so much, Radical Rethinkers, for sharing these ideas with us.